Good morning. It's Wednesday, January 22nd. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 474 days old. I'm your host, Jonathan Schanzer. Welcome back to the FDD Morning Brief. Well, he's back, and he's making moves that are bigger and bolder than ever before. The Donald is issuing loads of new executive orders and killing a slew of old ones. I'm not going to tell you that I like all of these moves. Heck, I'm not up to speed on most of them, but here's what I did like. Trump has killed the executive order that enabled, or dare I say, encouraged the State Department and Treasury to slap sanctions on Israelis in the West Bank. As a former Treasury analyst, I can tell you this: stalking citizens of allied countries, whether they live in disputed territories or not, was never the intent of our targeted sanctions program, and it never should be. So credit where it's due to our newly reelected president. As for all those other executive orders, give me a few days to digest it all. Keeping up with the news out of Washington may be tougher than keeping up with the news out of the Middle East. It's like drinking from a fire hose. For today's guest, we're looking eastward to Syria for a glimpse in how that country, if we can call it that, is faring after the fall of Assad's regime and the takeover by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS. And there's nobody better to discuss this with us than Mouaz Moustafa, Executive Director of the Syrian Emergency Task Force. Born and raised in Damascus, Mouaz has made it his mission to uplift the pro-democracy voices in his home country and to highlight the atrocities past and present taking place there. We're going to talk to him about how he views the changes in Syria in just a few short minutes, so hang tight for that. Well, Qatar is at it again. The tiny speck of a Persian Gulf nation just secured a hostage trade with another terrorist group. This time, the Taliban released two American nationals for a notorious narco-terrorist who handed his drug profits to the terrorists who killed thousands of Americans in Afghanistan. This comes on the heels of another Qatari hostage exchange brokered through Hamas. That exchange began on Sunday and will continue for another 39 days. During that time, an additional 30 Israelis are set to be released in exchange for nearly 2,000 jihadi psychopaths. And don't forget Syria. Qatar is a proud political and economic advocate for the new regime in Damascus. We're talking about the al-Qaeda affiliate group formerly known as the Nusra Front, now known as HTS. Bottom line, Qatar, a country of 330,000 people that controls more than 10% of the world's energy, pretends its clients are not violent terrorists hell-bent on destroying the American-led world order. And somehow the United States pretends to believe them. To make matters worse, we keep thanking this corrupt and soul-sucking country, which is little more than an Arab mafia family with a seat at the UN. And that includes administrations from both sides of the aisle. So let me say this clearly. Want to make America great again? Amazing. Maybe start with refusing to allow terror-sponsoring states to wheel and deal on behalf of jihadis. Better yet, how about adding Qatar to the state sponsors of terror list? That's long overdue. Now for your headlines. Headline 1, the IDF launched a counterterrorism operation in the West Bank city of Jenin. It began with a series of drone strikes targeting terrorist infrastructure in Jenin. The Israeli operation, dubbed Operation Iron Wall, is expected to last several days. It's a joint effort between the IDF and Shin Bet, along with border police officers and more. Jenin is a hotbed of Palestinian terrorism. It has been for years, but lately things have really gotten out of control. Last month, the Palestinian Authority launched its own counterterrorism operation in the city. Those clashes ended last Friday when the PA reached a truce agreement with a group of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorists known as the Jenin Battalion. Turns out the Israelis launched Operation Iron Wall after the PA failed to take care of business. Eyewitnesses reported seeing PA forces leave Jenin just as IDF troops entered. That looks like coordination. However, the PA said it was caught off guard by the Israeli operation. Not buying that. Headline 2, the Houthis are mouthing off as the Gaza ceasefire takes hold. In a speech on Monday, the group's leader, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, delivered public remarks on the Gaza ceasefire. He took it all back to the beginning, as in October 2023. Al-Houthi said that the Iran-backed terrorist group that he runs decided to enter the war after the strike on Gaza's Al-Ahli hospital that killed some dozen or 24 or even hundreds of Palestinians. Never mind that strike was caused by an errant Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket. But wait, there's more. Al-Houthi said his group was prepared to send hundreds of terrorists to fight in Gaza, but that neighboring governments wouldn't allow them safe passage. 15 months and a ceasefire later, Al-Houthi says his group will resume attacking Israel if Israel violates the ceasefire. Curious what he would think if Hamas violates the deal. Separately, the Houthis also notified Western shipping companies that they'll limit their attacks in the Red Sea to Israeli affiliated ships so long as the ceasefire holds. I'm curious to see how the Trump administration handles this mess. And headline 3, some twisted details are emerging about the hostage release over the weekend. Apparently, Hamas handed the 3 hostages so-called gift bags before transferring the women over to the Red Cross. The IDF released footage of the women holding paper bags adorned with the logo of Hamas's Izzadin al-Qassam brigades. That's the so-called military wing of Hamas. According to reports, the bags contain certificates and photos of the hostages in captivity. The women also received lanyards printed with the word Palestine. During their 471 days in Hamas hell, the women said they were moved to various locations, including to the designated humanitarian zone in southern Gaza. Think about that. Most of the time, the women were underground. One of them said she underwent surgery without anesthesia. The trio were only notified of their release hours before it happened, and they said that between the armed terrorists and the throngs of Gazans that were heckling them, the transfer itself was a nightmare. I'm just glad that their nightmare is over. And now for that interview with Mouaz Moustafa. As I mentioned earlier, Mouaz is a native Syrian who serves as the executive director of the Syrian Emergency Task Force, and his team works tirelessly to fight for democracy in Syria. We sought him out to talk about the recent regime change in Damascus, what awaits the people of Syria, and how the country is like to fit into the rapidly changing Middle East. So let's dive in right now on the FDD Morning Brief. Welcome to the program, Mouaz Moustafa.
Hi, thanks for having me.
All right, well, great to have you with us. Let me start by saying congratulations, or mabruk, as you might say, for the fall of the Assad regime. I know you've spent a great deal of time and effort working to weaken and ultimately undermine that terrible regime. What are your thoughts as you reflect now on the collapse of this horrific government?
Well, I think, on a personal level, it's surreal. I mean, to see someone who has been a genocidal dictator that had turned the Middle East into a place where there's great destability, lack of stability. He was selling Captagon and other horrific drugs throughout both the region and turned Syria into a narco state. The torture in these prisons and these dungeons is some of the most horrific torture and sadistic types of torture that I've ever heard of, whether it's what we saw in the Caesar photos and then finally the mass graves where hundreds of thousands of men, women, children, and elderly are buried today are all proof of how horrific the Assad regime and its allies Iran and Russia have been. So for me it's surreal as and for my family and for so many Syrians. It's amazing to see this horrific regime gone after 54 years of rule. But for the region and the world, I mean, this has been a geopolitical earthquake that I think makes the whole world a better and safer place. I mean, the fact that Iranian-backed militia groups like Hezbollah and the PMF and other groups from Iraq and Afghanistan brought in by Iran to kill the Syrian people and attack U.S. allies in the region is no longer a threat. Russia, which limited the United States military's ability to go after ISIS anywhere in Syria, is no longer a problem. The Assad regime, which has tortured to death countless Syrians, but also people from other countries, including American citizens, is no longer there. And I think that is something for the entire world to celebrate. Unfortunately, I feel most of the world have spent, and look, I get it. I mean, the Middle East is full of chaos and war and everything, but this is a moment to celebrate for the whole world, to see a genocidal regime go, to see Iran and Russia defeated, and I think over time people will see that this is a brand new day that I think would signal a much more stable Middle East and will have positive reverberations on Europe and the rest of the world.
Well, I tend to agree with the net result here of the fall of the Assad regime, but let's talk about the new regime. I had a feeling you'd be somewhat sanguine about what has just transpired, but the new regime, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, they're aligned with al-Qaeda. They're not moderate. I think we can say that for sure. So what do we expect here? Should they be given an opportunity to demonstrate their willingness to live peacefully in the region and to coexist with the minorities of Syria, with the majority of Syria for that matter? Are you confident that this is going to work out, or how do we assess what's going on?
Sure. I think the first thing that's really important is not to reduce the entire sort of struggle and revolution of the Syrian people to one individual or one group. It has been 14 years where 1 million Syrians have died, 14 million have been displaced. Syrians are now the most displaced people on earth. Hundreds of thousands suffered some of the most horrific crimes, being tortured to death and then thrown into mass graves, or having their bodies cremated or melted by acid, literally some of the most horrific things. And it was Syrians all together in the struggle of these 14 years, and the people that have lost their lives, that all deserve the credit for defeating the Assad regime. And looking at the new government in Syria today, the Joint Military Operations Command Room, yes, it was led by HTS, which is when HTS is led by Ahmed al-Shara, formerly Jolani. But it includes many other factions in this Joint Military Operations Command Room that liberated the country, killing an IRGC general in Aleppo, where they had to ship his body back to the supreme leader in Iran, getting rid of so many Hezbollah and Iranian-backed fighters as they went on to liberate the whole country, getting rid of some of these Russian advisors and soldiers, even on the ground, that lost their lives supporting a dictator in Syria, and getting rid of the Assad regime itself. Today, so, what's really important, I think, there's no doubt, number one, HTS obviously are not Western liberal Democrats. Number two, it's important to judge people by their actions. I'm not saying that there is beyond a checkered past for some of these individuals, etc. But looking at what has happened in the liberation of major towns, a military takeover, right, of major cities with millions of people. Aleppo, which was completely liberated in 2 days, had zero displacement. There were no reports of violations in Aleppo city. I spent a lot of time with the Eastern Orthodox priests, with the Bishop of Aleppo, the highest ranking Catholic in Syria, with Kurds, with other different minority sects, just to triple check, how are things going? What was really positive to hear, first were a couple of things. Number one, and I have to give this message out, I think it's important, I do it on every interview I give, is the Bishop of Aleppo, of some of the leadership of the minority communities, especially the Christians, were saying, Mouaz, there is so much misinformation and so much fear-mongering in the fake news on social media and this and that, people saying, oh, there's a bunch of terrorists coming across Syria and just slaughtering Christians and raping women and so on. And he says that's scaring my parishioners, where it's obviously fine. 2 days after the liberation of Aleppo, the whole city was under curfew except the Christian community, because they happened to have a local Christian celebration and they were allowed to go and shop and decorate. And then a day after that, they were decorating for Christmas and New Year's. And when I was in Damascus, only days after liberation, I can tell you there were more Christmas trees and reindeer and lights and Christmas decorations than there was in Washington, D.C. When it comes, and I'm just giving you these examples to show that now it's been over a month since liberation. The new leadership in Damascus has met with the leadership of all these different community minority groups across Syria, and when have we seen the Taliban or ISIS or Al Qaeda, right, or some of these Iranian-backed proxies? When have we seen them go into a town and not slaughter the Christians, or ISIS tear down, museums just because they said someone worshipped this idol a billion years ago, and lose world culture? When have we seen them not just make all women cover up their whole face and hair and everything? That's what happens when these groups that are Al Qaeda or tied to Al Qaeda, that are ISIS or tied to ISIS, that are Taliban or Iranian backed or whatever, that's how they operate. What we've seen in Syria are Christmas decorations. What we've seen in Syria are, in a country after 14 years of, again, the worst crimes by far of the 21st century. We don't see massive, revenge killings and so on. And we see a conversation that is happening with all these different aspects of Syrian society to discuss enshrining a new democracy and a new constitution that leads, God willing, to elections and a democracy. Extremist groups don't even consider these steps. So, look, I think people should judge the new Damascus government by its actions. And I think that the United States, that its allies in the region, in Europe, should look at Syria as potentially an important and valuable ally, and should help Syria stand up now that it's rid itself of Iranian-backed militias, now that the enduring defeat of ISIS is actually a realistic possibility, and to see that, Syria has been a bad actor for a long, long time, for decades, under the rule of the Assad regime and Iran. And today there's a chance for a new Middle East. I think it's been a very positive geopolitical earthquake that's happened in Syria.
So, I think I understand where some of your optimism comes from, but let me at least come back to you with this. The people that are standing behind the current regime are Muslim Brotherhood supporters, right? We're talking about Qatar, Turkey as the two primary patrons of this government. Are you concerned here that you're swapping out Iran-backed support for, the former regime in exchange for Sunni extremists that are backing this new? The Muslim Brotherhood is not a positive actor across the region. I think we can probably agree to that. And I understand you can't distill it all down to HTS, but you're now looking at an Al Qaeda government, or at least leadership, backed by Muslim Brotherhood patrons. No concerns?
Well, I think that's it's a very simplistic sort of a breakdown and slightly uninformed. Like, let's look at the Al Qaeda part, right? An Al Qaeda government. First of all, the Al Qaeda for the last 9 years or so, and even now, what Al Qaeda would affiliate itself with in Syria are a couple of groups, specifically something called HOR, Horas ad-Din. That's the actual Al Qaeda affiliate in Syria. Now, Horas ad-Din, the Al Qaeda affiliate, formerly Al Qaeda affiliate in Syria, has been wiped out from existence, even in coordination with Western security and government agencies, by the way, like the DOD and others. The reason that Horas ad-Din, which is Al Qaeda's affiliate in Syria, has zero presence there now, and Al Qaeda itself has zero actual footprint in Syria, unlike it does in Afghanistan or other parts where Al Qaeda operates and is there, is because, frankly, HTS. The fact that ISIS is completely defeated from the northeast is thanks to the United States working with our partner forces, the SDF, and the northwest is thanks to HTS working with the other groups that have been part of this coalition room. By the way, some are secular, some are Islamist, some are liberal, some are conservative in terms of these groups within this coalition. Now, in terms of countries that have been supportive of the new Syrian government, you're right. On that list is Turkey and Qatar. But on that list is Germany and the assistant secretary, and the United States, who's gone to Damascus, and a long list of foreign ministers from Western democratic countries that are not Al Qaeda or Muslim Brotherhood or anything, that have gone to Damascus to see for themselves and to meet. Having 1 million Syrians come back from Europe to Syria and rebuild their country is a good thing. By the way, the Muslim Brotherhood, not a good whatever entity, actor, anything in the Middle East. That's not who rules Syria today either. What we have in Syria today is a new government. There is HTS, which has a bad past. It had been affiliated with Al Qaeda in the past. It had been, kind of not fighting ISIS in its early days. But, and I'm talking about not today or over the last month, for the last decade, it has been the toughest enemy of ISIS and Al Qaeda outside of the United States military and our partner forces. And if you were to see anyone from the new government or HDS, in a room with someone from ISIS or Al Qaeda, they would kill each other. That's a fact. That's a fact. And so it's important. Again, I'm not defending, and I don't agree with every one of their political views or Ahmed Shah's worldview on whatever. I'm not defending that. But I have to be clear that in reality today, Al Qaeda and ISIS are enemies of HTS and vice versa. That's just kind of putting it out there, and there's plenty of very specific evidence of that, including in battles and so on, including assessments from our intelligence agencies here in the United States on that. But what we have to do, I think, is make sure that Syria continues on the path of a democratic republic, because democracies don't go to war with each other. That Syria continues to protect its minority groups, because a democracy isn't just about the majority, but about the enshrined rights of every one of its citizens. And as we go through this national conference and this establishment of a constitution, I think the world should play an important role, not in just kind of pushing away Syria and saying, okay, whoever's there, they're all terrorists, and let it continue and maybe become a failed state, because that's not good for anyone. And strategically and morally, it's wrong. But if we keep the optimism that is very much deserving, and we really assess what's happening and look at things in a more nuanced way. Obviously, I mean, HTS to anyone looks scary, beards, and so on coming in. But if we look at really the actions, really what's happening, I think we can help Syria be an ally to our allies and to the United States. I also wanted to mention, in these conversations with these different minority groups, which I'm happy to invite some to your show. I mean, bring the Bishop of Aleppo, bring someone else and discuss with them. What do you think about these new guys? But also the Syrian Jewish community. I mean, frankly, the Syrian Jewish community is one of the oldest, if not it's definitely older in Syria than Christians and Muslims, date back to 3,000 years and more. The Jober synagogue, I think, is probably the oldest synagogue in the world, destroyed by the Assad regime and protected, by the way, for a long time by the rebels and the Syrian people and those that were fighting against this regime. But even when it comes to not even when it comes to, because this is a right for everyone. I mean, when it comes to Christians, when it comes to the Syrian Jewish community, when it comes to the holy sites and cemeteries and synagogues or churches or mosques, etc., we've had linked conversations with the new Damascus government on number one, ensuring that they're protecting these areas, but number two, ensuring that Syria is open to all of its people, regardless of religion and ethnicity. And I can tell you, I don't want to go into too many details, but it has been such positive conversations. And I think that Syria is a new Syria, and one that is not one ruled by terrorists anymore. It had been ruled by terrorists for a long time with Iran and Russia and Assad. And I think it has a chance to be to be a beautiful and democratic new country. But we must, kind of give it the benefit in the doubt when it's due. Is all I would say.
Understood. I'm not sure I have the same sanguine outlook, but I'm hoping. And I hope you're right. I hope the trajectory that Syria is on is a positive one. I think, in all likelihood, we're down a long road here. But with any luck, and a bit of guidance, maybe this comes out the right way. But maybe we'll have you back and we can reassess after a few months and see what path we're on. In the interim, I want to thank you, Mouaz Moustafa, for joining us today on the FDD Morning Brief.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Have a wonderful day.
Maybe a bit more optimistic than I'd be, but you know what? It's not my country, and I wish them luck. Here's what FDD has on tap for you today. FDD adjunct fellow and Jerusalem Post columnist Seth Frantzman penned a piece in the Jerusalem Strategic Tribune analyzing Israel's dilemma as the 60-day ceasefire with Lebanon, Hezbollah in particular, comes to an end. Following heavy blows to Hezbollah, the group is slowly rebuilding, presenting Israel with a painful gambit. Should Israel continue its withdrawal from southern Lebanon, risking the further empowerment of a terror organization that it vowed to destroy? Or should it renew its offensive, potentially alienating its Western allies? Stay tuned for that decision. My colleague Jonathan Conricus appeared on LBC News to discuss Hamas's psychological warfare tactics amidst the ongoing hostage deal. Hamas has refused to disclose the names of the Israeli captives slated for release during the weeks-long ceasefire, adding yet another complicated layer to this already shaky deal. And finally, be sure to tune in to the latest episode of Coercive Capital, a podcast hosted by my colleague Elaine Dezensky. In the current episode, Elaine explores the corrupt practices of dictators like Vladimir Putin and the ousted Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad, who pilfered public funds and launder them through the global financial system. Want to know how the international community can combat this illicit financial flow? Listen to the episode wherever you get your podcasts. And that's a wrap for today, folks. Looking for something to read that will make you look smart to your friends and colleagues? Well, we got you. Just check out the expert analysis on our website, fdd.org. Just kidding, of course. We know that you're smart already if you're tuning into this program. But if you want to stay super current, read our quick takes on X at FDD or the videos we post on Instagram and YouTube. And if you want to feel really good about yourself, you can make that tax-deductible donation at fdd.org/invest. Tune in Friday for another gripping episode of the FDD Morning Brief. Until then, I'm Jonathan Schanzer, signing off for FDD.